Hi, and welcome to another episode of Prodigy Search Presents. I'm Mark Resch Jr., partner at Prodigy Search. I'm excited to welcome a good friend of mine, Mike Nichols, Chief Business Officer at the LPGA Symetra Tour. Mike, thank you for joining us today and participating.
Mark, thanks for having me on.
Of course. Mike has been with the LPGA for, I think, 14 plus years now, and adding new tournament events, increasing purse sizes. He'll talk about his role in a second. Prior was a championship director for the USGA, and earlier in his career was the executive director of the Farmers Charity Classic. Among other things, Mike is a diehard New York Giants and Yankees fan, and the father of the NASCAR whiz kid, who I'd recommend giving a follow to on Twitter. Very great follow on Twitter, exciting background, and quite the interesting young individual, motivated, hungry, and loves his sport. So, Mike, again, thank you for joining us. I'd love to jump right in. Let's talk about your role. Let's talk about your day-to-day, your key areas of focus, and what you're charged with, what you're tasked with for the tour.
Yeah, so the simplest description whenever I'm asked that question is responsible for putting together the schedule. So really, then obviously when you think, well, what does that take? Well, a lot of things go into that. Obviously, we have to identify communities that want to host the Symetra Tour, golf courses that want to host us, and then, really the leading thing in any golf tour, quite frankly, is finding the corporate support to make the event go, which really sort of takes on twofold. There's people be most familiar with the title sponsors whose names typically appear on golf tournaments, both domestically and all over the world. But then there's also sort of the local community support, some of the people who might buy ads in the program, local signage and things like that. So there's a lot that goes into that. I have a good team that helps do various portions of that. And then in addition, we have a team that actually goes out and executes that as well. So we play in, well, typically, obviously, it's an interesting year, but we'll typically play about 20 times across the U.S. And what we try to do is put together a schedule that's geographically something where players can drive from event to event without having to get on a plane and incur those sorts of costs.
Certainly appropriate given today's.
Yes, exactly.
Talk to me about the current status of the tour given the COVID-19 crisis and what the plans are moving forward.
Sure. So the Symetra Tour that I oversee, and for those people who may not be familiar with it, we're the official qualifying tour of the LPGA, and at the end of our season each year, we graduate 10 players onto the LPGA Tour for the following year. So people who might be familiar with the PGA Tours, Nationwide Tour, Korn Ferry Tour, we're the LPGA's equivalent of that. And currently, we're scheduled to tee it up in the middle of June with an event in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And so that's when we're hopeful to get started. We only played one event before sort of everything shut down, but we have our fingers crossed that, with the economy slowly starting to open up, and it sounds like Michigan is going to be supportive, hopefully by the time we roll up there in June, of us having the event there. And then on the LPGA side, I think we just announced that LPGA is going to be starting the week after the 4th of July in Toledo, Ohio. So we'll be a little bit ahead of the LPGA, which might be a good opportunity for us to sort of test some of the different protocols and testing and safety measures and social distancing that I think we're all going to have to sort of work through as all sports come back to playing.
Mike, you and I are big fans of the game, of the golf industry, and I thought about this a lot and chatted with a lot of industry friends who, again, are golfers on the weekends. They might not work for any of the tours, but if you kind of rewind a little bit to last month or the prior 4 to 6 weeks, what was the one thing that when you heard it was maybe it was the Players Championship or the Masters, maybe there was another event or just golf courses, public golf courses being closed? Like, what was the one golf specific happening that when it got canceled or postponed, you were like, okay, this is serious. What's going on in this environment in the U.S. and the world is serious.
Yeah, so I think there was, obviously it was very fluid for everyone. This kind of happened, it was sort of a gradual situation. And I do remember that when we were sitting, we were looking to play the Symetra Tour. We had a couple of events back to back in California. And at the time, the governor had sort of come out and said, hey, we want to implement social distancing and no gatherings of more than 10 people or more, that sort of thing. So at that point, you're starting to work through and say, okay, from a logistics standpoint, can we run an event be in a situation where people aren't gathering in groups of 10 or more? So you're starting to look and say, okay, well, maybe some of the parties are canceled, or maybe the way we feed players as they go out, it's to-go boxes, and same with the volunteers and things like that. But you're working through it in a way that you're thinking, okay, we can sort of find a way to work around this, 10 people gathering thing. And then not too soon after that, they came and said, all golf courses are closed. And I think that was, that's obviously the point at which you say, well, we might be able to work around all these other things, but if the golf course that we want to play isn't open. So I think that was really the thing where we started to look and say, okay, this isn't going to be maybe as easy as we thought it would. We could sort of, come up with our own little plans on the whiteboard, and here's how it's all going to work. But if you don't have the golf courses to play on, that's a challenge. And then, as we all know, it's different states, at least in the initial rollout, we're doing different things. And it's even the case right now with golf courses. The golf courses here in Florida are open, and then in many other states, they're not yet open. So there's going to be sort of varying degrees of that, but that's why we're hopeful when we start back in June that most of the golf courses, obviously all of the golf courses, we hope, that we'll be heading out to will be open.
Well, and we'll get into certainly what the golf industry is doing and what some of the tours are doing to adjust and to adapt, and some of the things that policies and procedures you're going to implement or you're hoping to implement without getting into great detail until they do get implemented. But a few weeks ago, I found it interesting, and it was certainly public. It was in the Sports Business Journal, and it was out there. Commissioner Michael Wan came out and introduced the cash advance program, because of the current climate we're in and helping the players out. And, I'd love to learn more about that program, what the thought behind it was, and maybe the rationale, maybe how it's being implemented, whatever information you're willing to share about that program.
Yeah. So it's maybe a good opportunity for your sort of our viewers here to understand a little bit about the models and how sort of golf tournaments work. I alluded a little bit to title sponsors, and the title sponsors typically, again, on most tours are responsible for underwriting the purse of the event. So that's what's, you see it in the paper. This is how much the people are playing for this week. This is how much they won. And so the challenge that we have is that that's the only way that players make money. You actually have to play the tournaments in order for the players to earn a living. So it's not like some sports where, baseball players right now might be taking a salary, without knowing the various, constraints of contracts and whatnot. But, you have other athletes in other sports that have guaranteed contracts and these sort of things. So they're still getting paychecks and from their various sports and ownership groups. Whereas we both, it's no different on the PGA Tour either. Any golf tour, that's how players outside of endorsements earn a living. And so the challenge was looking and saying, well, what can we be doing to help these players, understanding that, we have some players that are multimillionaires and, will be fine for a couple of weeks. And then we have others who are just graduated from college and are looking forward to starting their rookie season and, maybe only got to play a couple of events. So the thinking was, what can we do to, I think the best way to look at it is maybe it's like almost a sales draft, like when those of us who are in sales think about sort of getting prepaid your commission on money you're going to earn down the way. So that was really what it was saying to the players, hey, if you're in a situation where you need the money now, based on what you're expecting to earn down the later in the year, we're happy to advance some of that money to you now. So it was, one of the other things that a lot of people may not understand is that as the LPGA, we are both the league and the Players Association. So it's not like there's the NBA Players Association and the NBA. We are one and the same. So all of us who work for the LPGA Tour are working for the Players Association and putting on the events on the players' behalf. So every day we wake up, we're trying to think of what can we do to serve our members who are the players. And this was just a way that we thought. It was certainly modest. It wasn't anything that, anybody is going to do anything great with, but, every little bit helps. And so we were, grateful to be, the commissioner sort of thought to make this program available both to the LPGA players as well as the Symetra Tour players.
I mean, what a great program in the grand scheme of things. Like you said, even though it's not, a ton of money, you're building that loyalty up with the players. You're showing them that you care about them. And you're right, golf and certain other sports, there's certain sports that are just so unique. If you even exclude the endorsement dollar as compared to the big four, the big five. So kudos to you. And I'm curious because, one of the other things is, you were modest in describing your role earlier, because I think you do wear many hats. You do have a lot of things that fall under you, and I know you have a large staff that reports up through you. So maybe you want to give them credit for the things that you're responsible for. But let's talk about among the communication with fans, with players, with sponsors. To communicate, what has the messaging been to them about? Hey, here's when we're going to come back, or here's what things we're going to implement. What's the dialogue been with a lot of your stakeholders? Because you have so many stakeholders in your current role, vendors, your staff, because people do want to know how you're leading your team, et cetera. So how are you communicating with all the stakeholders and vice versa?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think the thing that I've seen that's really been quite incredible through this is sort of the amount of one is collaboration, that people, and as well as understanding and patience. I don't think I think everybody's to the point as they look at their own business that there's so much uncertainty. And so as they look at their own business and see uncertainty, there's no sort of expectation that the LPGA or the Symetra Tour would have the answers any more than these organizations might. But I mean, it's a great opportunity for me. And, I talk to Commissioner Wan about this all the time, how grateful we are to have the sponsors that we have of both of our tours, because we've had the sponsors as well as the venues that we've played have allowed us a lot of flexibility to take events in sort of the March, April timeframe and figure out, hey, can we reschedule these into September, October, November? On the Symetra Tour right now, we're looking to extend our season by 5 weeks from what it was to try to get as many of these events as possible. We're scheduling events into what were previously off weeks. And, I can sit here all day long with an Excel spreadsheet and sort of say, okay, let's play this one here and play this one here and do all this. But if you don't have venues that are willing to rework their sort of schedule of events that they have, I mean, that's the challenge that a lot of people don't think about with golf tournaments is when you say we want to reschedule a golf tournament, you're looking at needing that golf course exclusively for a period of 6 or 7 days. It's not like if you're, going to Yankee Stadium, you just need it for, 3-hour time and you can have all these other events. There can be a Rolling Stones concert the next day. It doesn't matter, but you need that golf course exclusively. So first of all, the venue has to be able to work with you. And then you have to have the sponsors too that are saying, this is, they're obviously sponsors of all shapes and sizes are having their own challenges, but for our sponsors to say, we believe so much in what the LPGA is doing and what it stands for and the sort of the diversity inclusion message that a lot of our sponsors have built into their relationship with the LPGA, that maybe they're looking at the sponsorship and saying, this is important to sort of the fabric and what sort of the mission of our company is and what we want it to do. So, it's like I said, it's easy to for me to sit here and sort of do the rework the schedule and do all of that kind of stuff. But without the sponsors who want to come along and find a way to make it work, my job would be impossible. But as we sit here today, we started the season with a 20 event schedule and currently are looking at a draft. We feel pretty good about playing 17 of our 20 Symetra Tour events, which is pretty incredible when you look at sort of what we've had to cancel and postpone. So it's certainly not been easy. There's but a lot of and again, it's not just myself, the folks both in the markets we play, but also the staff at headquarters who are all now in their own homes trying to make all this work. So it's a fun challenge to a certain degree. But I said to the commissioner the other day, I said, I feel like I've just solved the Rubik's Cube, but I'm not sure I'm going to be able to show anybody. I'm not going to be able to show anybody that I completed it. He said, well, you might get a chance to solve it a couple more times. So, but I feel like we've already solved it 4 or 5 times. But I think the difference that I feel as we sit here today is that when you look at what's sort of happening in terms of the momentum at the state level and governors are coming out and saying, here's sort of a plan for us to try to get back to normal and sort of phase in business slowly. I think that I have a sort of different level of optimism as I roll out, draft 10 of the schedule that we've been working on. I kind of feel like the one that we have just sort of rolled out is going to be one that I think will stick.
And I think you hit on something a moment ago as well, which I would suspect most people don't take into account, which is we'll just push the Masters back. We'll just push, your first event, that you said hopefully is in June, we'll just push them back. And you guys don't own and run all the venues, the courses. And to a certain extent, you're maybe similar to a UFC, UFC, right? You're at the, whatever's available at that arena, whatever's available at that course, that day, that weekend. But for your case, 7 days. It's not just the 4 days of the tournament. It's a pro-am. It's a lead up and, construction maybe when necessary, when appropriate. It's not easy trying to just reschedule, just throw it on another date in the fall.
Yeah, no, we're in some situations where, we'll have a Saturday finish one week. We might have a Friday finish another week because on the venue that we want to play, there's a wedding on Saturday. I mean, it's to that point, but you're like, hey, if this is what it's going to take to get in the tournament, the venue is willing to work with us. And, if we can finish on Friday and get the players, from the place we're playing the week before there in enough time to prepare and play, then we're going to have a Friday finish because as the players look at it, it's more important to play and have the opportunity. If we don't have the tournament, we want to have the perfect tournament and say, oh, we only have tournaments that finish on Sunday. Well, then that would be one less tournament. So, I think everybody's looking at it from the standpoint of, hey, whatever we can do to play these tournaments, it's not going to be perfect. It might not be pretty, but like I said, the only way these players can make money is if we're playing tournaments. And so that's what we're committed to do, is finding ways, getting as creative as we can to make sure we have some sort of schedule for them to play.
And to that point, how do we get there, Mike? Right? What are some of the things, the potential best practice? What are the procedures, policies? What are the things we could do at all levels, professional, amateur golf, PGA Tour, Champions Tour, your tours, to bring them back to either normal competition, as in status quo with fans, regular camera and TV and regular media production, or the empty course scenario? Either way, how do we get back to some sort of normal, bringing all of the tours, professional and amateur, back?
Yeah, when this all started, it's really interesting in terms of the evolution of the conversation. When this first started and we were in sort of the February, March timeframe and we're looking at the schedule, the conversation was like, gosh, would we ever consider doing an event without fans? Like, would we ever consider something so radical as to play a golf tournament without fans, right? And I mean, that was actually the conversation.
Yeah.
And now you don't even think, you're so far beyond that, right? It's that's just a given. So, I think initially we're going to come back without fans. I mean, I think the benefit of running the Symetra Tour versus the LPGA Tour or PGA Tour is, the scope of it is just naturally much smaller, right? You don't have to worry about the television production crew. That's 150 people you don't have to worry about. Because of them, you don't need quite as many volunteers. So we can definitely do things on a much smaller scale. And I'm sure what we'll do when we start, again, hopefully in June, with the LPGA coming in about 3 weeks behind us, is, put into practice some of these things and say, okay, what did we do well this week on the Symetra Tour? What can we improve for the next Symetra Tour event? What are some of the things that we can implement? And, we're sitting here, whatever it is, 4 or 5 weeks now from that first event. And we've certainly got a long way to go in terms of, what that ultimately is going to look like. I can say that we've, had some interesting conversations with companies around technology that will help us get back a little bit sooner. So that's stuff that we're still exploring. And, I think as I mentioned just briefly at the beginning of this, there's just been a lot more collaboration. I mean, the golf industry in recent years, I've noticed there's been a lot more collaboration amongst all of the various entities. That's happening more than now. It's happening more across sports than ever before. And, I think we're all, competing at some level, but I think right now everybody sort of realizes that it's in everybody's best interest that we all find a way to come back. And so, what that ultimately looks like, I mean, if we had the, crystal ball, that would be the thing to have. But, I think everybody's just sort of probably going to learn a little bit once, everybody else gets out there. And so, I've seen recently the news earlier that, NASCAR is going to try to come back without fans in sort of early or late May. And so that might be the first sort of entry back into the normal sports scene. So, is that the kind of event that we might go to as the LPGA, just to sort of see what they're doing and what sort of technologies they're using? It's quite possible, because nobody has the silver bullet. Nobody knows what the answer is. And so, but I think the sense of collaboration has been really, really cool to see.
Like you talked about the players earlier. We were talking about the cash advance program, and one of the things I was curious about is, your tour and all the other golf tours have such a global presence. The players come from all over. And perhaps even in certain circles, certain tours are even more diverse from that, to use your word, familiar and inclusive from a global player representation perspective. How do you deal with the one side, which is the one to compete and to earn, and the safety side? Like, how is that dynamic with the players that are, not that it's not a U.S. issue, but it's a global issue when your tour and all the other tours are bringing in players that come from all over?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something that we've talked about. Like, obviously the LPGA Tour has an international footprint, but I believe this year on the Symetra Tour, we have members from over 40 countries, even on the Symetra Tour. So,
Wow.
a lot of them are products of the U.S. college system. So they may have played at Duke or Arizona State or whatever. So even though they may be an international player, they might have sort of settled down here in the United States to play. So the majority of the players, even if international, are already here. But that's definitely been a concern. I know of some, LPGA players who have not been able to go back to their homeland just because there's been those travel restrictions.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously there's the travel restrictions of coming in here into the U.S. So without question, those are the conversations that we're having. We feel good that the majority of our players are here, but until you actually sort of get to that moment, the players that are international are going to have to come in and sort of quarantine, I believe, for about a 2-week period before we start playing. So that's why we have to be very proactive with our communication to the players on here's when we intend to play, because if we as the Symetra Tour intend to come back in sort of the mid-June timeframe, that means players need to start arriving at the end of May in order to sort of self-quarantine to a point where we're ready to welcome them into the tournament. So those are big conversations, and as you said, different for the global golf tours and tennis, as you alluded to, maybe more so than any of the other stick and ball sports.
Like, what about golf from a recreation standpoint? The idea of getting back. I mean, you said Florida, the courses are open. I think Arizona. There's some other pockets of the country where golf is so prevalent that the courses are open. But one of the things we're curious about is whether these things or whether you would take an educated guess that here's how we can get back to opening up private and public golf courses. Here's how we can get back to opening up driving ranges and top golfs and the recreation side of golf. How do we get back to opening that back up, that business, which is, again, critical because, like you said, you're building up, a fan base. You're keeping people engaged. It's part of the golf commerce, right? People buying more equipment and, and things of that nature. So how do we get back to the recreation side, again, opening back up, if you will, in terms of courses, driving ranges, things of that nature?
Well, I think the thing that was interesting, and I heard it on the news the other day, and I can't remember who said it, but I thought that's the answer right there, is somebody said something about, like, we have to get out of the business of saying what's an essential business, as opposed to saying, what can we open safely? Because there's so much, everybody gets so worked up about, why are golf courses open? Are they an essential business? And then it's like, okay, well, there's 200 acres out there. And if I'm the only person out there, I mean, that's professional social distancing, I would think, right? So, but, so when you look at those sort of things, I mean, I've heard stories about, what golf is doing, things in terms of, turning the cups upside down so that people don't touch the flagstick or have to reach in for their ball. I think almost every golf course in the country has one player per cart, so that two people can't share a cart and sort of the social distancing. But on the other side of it, I've heard of, husband and wives who arrive to play golf together and, they're told that they have to take 2 carts. And it's like, well, we just, we woke up together, we drove over here together, but now I'm outside and I have to be in a different, so there are certain things like that where I think we're going to have to get past a lot of the rules and just get back to general common sense. And like I said, whoever was that sort of said, let's not, let's stop fighting over what's essential and what's not essential. We live here in Florida, and the governor a couple of weeks ago said, the WWE is essential. And, one of my friends texted me and says, how can you possibly say the WWE is essential? And I said, well, for people who work for the WWE, I bet they think it's essential. The XFL went out of business. I bet they think the WWE is pretty essential. So we both have friends that work for the XFL. So I think the more we sort of get out of the, sort of shaming people into whether or not their business is essential. Is opening a golf course essential? Obviously not. But just 2 people going out and playing golf on a 200-acre property, is that harming anybody? Is that, spreading the thing? So I think that we're sort of having this evolution of common sense. And I think that's going to be a big part of it, not only in golf, just in general of everything getting back open.
Like, what about, the recreation side of golf? Follow me for a second, and perhaps even the professional amateur side, but to stay on that same question, how about comparing it to the stick and ball sports, the traditional stick and ball sports, that the team side, right? And I think about, the neighborhood, the playground in my area, they took down all the basketball hoops. Like the court's still there, the backboard's there, but there's no hoops. And, my son's basketball season so certain sports where there's people in a confined area, enclosed, close to each other. There's clearly a lot of contact and things of that nature. Could golf, in a weird way, right? And this is spinning this, I guess. Could golf benefit from the other traditional stick and ball sports that are team side where there's a lot of contact? Could golf benefit from that in terms of getting, maybe people are just kind of defaulting to, well, maybe I'll try it, right? I mean, I'll give it a whirl. I'll go to the driving range. I'll try the court. I mean, could golf in again, a backwards way benefit from the other sports still being cautious about approaching the other sports?
Well, I think you probably could, just from the ability to participate. Went over, haven't had a chance to do it in a long time, but this weekend went with my kids over to the driving range because that was a situation we could go. I would go in, get the tokens, and then, after that, we're all, sort of spread out and doing our own thing and social distancing. So I hadn't done that with the family in a while, but it was one of those things that it was like something that we knew we could do safely. You can only walk around the neighborhood or ride bikes or do all of that kind of stuff. So, just looking at it from a totally personal perspective, it was something where it's like, here's something different we can do. We know it's, you run into risks every day of, just getting up in the morning and driving your car, but something that we felt that we could do safely as a family, and it was something different. Whereas, to your point, we wouldn't be able to go play at the, shoot hoops down the street. So I think, hopefully some people will look at that, but I think, we again have to get over the fact of like golf not being essential. And so, are some people going to say, well, I don't want to be associated with the stigma of, going and playing golf right now when I don't need to. So it's certainly possible. Like I said, it's relatable from a personal level, but we'll certainly see.
Well, Mike, we talked about your career at the very beginning of our call, and in the places you've worked, the positions you've been in, and obviously it spans enough time, which I'm not, there's no commentary there on age. It spans enough time where you've experienced a lot, and you've been through some unique times that aren't just a global pandemic, right? 9/11 or a recession or something, something else. So I'm curious about adversity, right? And throughout your 20-year career, I mean, experiencing adversity because of something that happened on the course or that happened in the office or with a sponsor, but also if there's just adversity, you can't believe you overcame a certain hurdle, you and your team overcame a certain hurdle during any of those situations I just mentioned that impacted the world or the country. What comes to mind? What examples come to mind of you overcoming and your team or your event overcoming, scenario, not apples to apples, but somewhat similar to what we're encountering right now?
Yeah, so there's sort of two. One sort of the national thing, and the second sort of share is more personal. So it's the obvious default to most people, but sort of anybody of our generation immediately goes back to 9/11 as sort of being the time where everything stood still. And what I remember most about that, other than obviously, all of, the feelings you have about the event, was, so that happened obviously in September, and I had a golf tournament. Fortunately for me, the golf tournament wasn't coming up, until the next year, until 2002. But just sitting in my office and thinking to myself, like, when can I call anybody about this golf tournament? Like, when do I not seem like the callous guy who's like, hey, you want to buy a Pro-Am team or a skybox for the golf tournament? And they're like, do you realize like what we're going through right now? Like, are you that guy? So I remember just the hesitancy to do that. And I feel the same way now. The one thing that I think is a little bit different is, I think in this situation, everybody is really wanting to get back to normal. I'm not saying people didn't want to get back to normal 9/11, but like it was, everybody just sort of wanted to stop and be respectful. But now people are just so anxious to keep talking about the future. I've made a point to, try to reach out to not necessarily people who are prospective sponsors, but just old friends that I haven't connected with, just to sort of stay attuned to what's going on in the industry without necessarily feeling like the person I'm calling is a sales call, because they know I'm not trying to sell them anything. Say that from a national perspective. And then sort of the biggest one I would say from a personal level in terms of overcoming an obstacle is, so my first ever opportunity to run a professional golf tournament, it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and I moved from Miami, Florida. I was a sort of a sales director of a Champions Tour event in Miami, Florida. I moved in December of 2006 up to take over a Champions Tour event, become the executive director of an event that wasn't to happen in 2007. And the title sponsor of that event had just been acquired. It was a bank acquisition, during that time of 96, 97. Banks were merging like every week, it seemed like. And so when I took the job, I was assured that, the new title sponsor or the new acquiring bank was committed to the tournament, they would be around. And within about 6 months of me arriving on the job, I realized that the title sponsor is like, yeah, we're not going to be involved next year. So this is, I'm 26 years old or whatever, super excited to have just landed my first tournament director job, moved from Miami to Grand Rapids, Michigan. Everything's great. And all of a sudden I'm thinking to myself, like, this may be the shortest tournament director gig in history if I don't find a title sponsor. And at the time, Grand Rapids, Michigan didn't have a ton of prospects. So it was a pretty short list. And as you can imagine, in the course of going through just running a tournament, looking for secondary sponsors, you kind of had to just go back through that list of a lot of people who frankly had said no to you to buying a $10,000 sponsorship, let alone a $1 million sponsorship. So, I was fortunate at that time. A company there in Grand Rapids, Foremost Insurance, wasn't very well known, and, was able to go in and, like as a 26-year-old, sit across from the CEO of this insurance company and get him to commit to spending, a multi-million-dollar three-year tournament to sort of save, to save the tournament, but it's more important to me, save my job. But that was pretty cool. That was probably one of the scariest times of my career personally, because you're thinking, here I've gotten this huge break to run this tournament, but at the same time, it may be, the end of my career. I might be selling insurance if I don't pull this off. So that was quite fulfilling, and I look back on that fondly.
I love both of those examples because I think we've all faced to your point about the first one, right? And making, any calls to clients or partners or prospects and how that comes across. But to your other example, my hope, and this goes for our business at Prodigy and anybody else right now in our industry in general, not just golf, but the entire industry, is that we do get more creative, we do get innovative, and we don't just rest on our laurels or here's the way we've done things, because of the history of our game or our sport or our industry. So maybe that's what comes out of that is just some innovation, if nothing else, and a better way to do things. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. As I said to we had a call the other day with a couple of the players, and I said, look, if your question is about to start with, is there any chance we might? The answer is yes. Like, it doesn't even matter what you're about to say, because that's really the world we live in right now. And things, like I said, at the beginning of this call, where we thought it was just crazy to think about playing without fans. Like, how could you ever talk about something so crazy? And now every league that comes back is going to start without fans, and so, but that's, I'm not saying that's necessarily innovative, but that's just, you talk about the paradigm shift of how people's minds have changed about what it's going to take to get back to normal. So it's,
absolutely.
I look back fondly on that, title sponsorship I sold, whatever that was, 20 some odd years ago, as like a defining moment of my career. And I think a lot of us, all of us probably are going to look back on this and say, how you sort of handled this and reflect is something that made you a better at whatever your job is. And so I bet that in every, prospective candidate interview you have going forward, you're going to have to say, tell me about a time COVID where you overcame a certain obstacle. So
new to the repertoire, that's for sure.
Exactly.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time today. Love the insights, love the stories, the examples. Obviously wish you luck this summer. I hope everything does start on time and with safety in mind, but please stay healthy. And again, thank you so much, Mike.
All right, Mark, thanks so much for the invite.